I'd like to welcome everyone to this Oracle session for even more stories from the Secret City. This is February the 19th, 2024. And I'm glad that you're here. And the way that we'll proceed is that I will ask for your input and request anything you'd like for us to focus on, and then we'll talk about that near the end for the other two sessions that come up the following two Mondays. But I would like for you to participate as we're going. So when you want to join in, just unmute yourself and speak up. I have a guest with me today. Matt Mullins is here from the American Museum of Science and Energy. All right. Matt, if you are ready, I'll give you a short introduction and then you can start sharing your screen as you need to. Matt is the marketing manager for the American Museum of Science and Energy. He's a good friend. We go back a long ways, and we've enjoyed several opportunities to work together. And I'm proud of what he's doing for the museum. I think we're doing a lot in social media. I mean, COVID caused us to learn how to do things a little different, and Matt's doing it well. He'll also talk to you about videos that they have, and I think he's changed the name of their podcast to the American Museum of Science and Energy podcast as opposed to ANSICast. But I'll let Matt take it over and share with you for a little bit. Now, I know Matt well, so if you want to interrupt him at any time, he will not mind at all. And the more you interact with us, the better you will feel about this day, and I will too, if we can have conversation about what's going on the screen. So don't hesitate to unmute and ask a question. You can also put something in the chat. I'll try to watch that as well. Okay, Matt.
Yes, yes. So we are at least on track. So I'll go ahead and begin sharing with all of you some of the experiences from the early days of this museum until current time. Um, Obviously, a number of you might remember the American Museum of Atomic Energy and how that museum has was the foundation beginning in 1949, coming up on our 75th anniversary. That's a quite exciting time. We have several events planned on March 19th. The museum will be free that day, and we'll have some treats and cupcakes and things like that at the museum. And then that Saturday, also the 23rd of March, we're also hosting a free day at the museum. So we're inviting everybody out to participate in that. But I feel like it's also important to give you a little bit of history about myself. Both of my grandparents moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee for the Manhattan Project. Though I was not born in Oak Ridge, I was issued by the United States Army at a Army base in Tacoma, Washington. The dapper young fella that you see sitting in that Willis Jeep is my grandfather, H.D. Kofer, Harold DeWillis Kofer. And he and Ray actually have a great history together.
Yes.
And we're good pals for a long time. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, Subic Bay, Philippines, 1945. When I will lead the DOE Public Facilities bus tour, one of the things that I start off talking about is inside the museum, there is a 3D printed replica of this Willis Jeep made by Oak Ridge National Lab. On December 7th, 1941, my grandfather was delivering newspapers in Chattanooga, Tennessee, announcing the invasion of Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Pearl Harbor from the Japanese. This young man is 17 years old, preparing for the land invasion a few short years later into Japan. When his parents moved to Oak Ridge, his father, Paul Kofer, was a carpenter building some of the original facilities out there, out here in Oak Ridge. And Tynesy Kofer, his mother, was a cafeteria worker. And it is interesting to think that their son, who was delivering newspapers during that bombing, was preparing for the land invasion. And the work done in Oak Ridge is the reason I have the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm honored to be able to carry on that tradition. So when I walk through that museum, I have a direct orientation to what this museum talks about, what that early history is. It's a great pleasure to speak with all of you today, so I appreciate the opportunity. But my roots do go quite a ways back to the founding of Oak Ridge, through the Manhattan Project. Both of my parents were born in Oak Ridge, and they met, and biology happens, and here I am many years later. But to get past the roots of this story, I want to begin with who we are. We are the American Museum of Science and Energy Foundation, the American Museum of Science and Energy, and the K-25 History Center. Obviously, AMSI has its roots back in the opening of the center of the city. Then the foundation came along and was formalized a couple of decades ago. And then just a couple of years ago, the K-25 History Center opened. And since that time, the foundation has had a model to support the work of the national labs, and the other federal facilities that are in this area. And it's an interesting collection of people that operate this foundation. We've had a really excellent and phenomenal group of individuals who have helped spearhead and guide this museum to date. And in the past couple of years, we have also had the opportunity to bring on newer members to the foundation and to the board who are still engaged in high-tech development and research and part of the technology and innovation corridor that makes up Oak Ridge in East Tennessee. We have an international board, and then we have a larger board kind of across the country that helps facilitate the vision and initiatives of the American Museum of Science and Energy Foundation. Obviously, we understand that the history is 1949. That's the same day the museum has opened. There's a lovely old picture of one of those old buildings from an old postcard. But what we need to remember is that in 2018, we did move. I will tell people that the museum used to be located in the center of town, and now we're located in the center of town. We just moved about a mile or so away, and it's a wonderful building. But in all honesty, I feel like it's important to note that as nice as this building is, the museum itself is always fighting to reclaim our presence within the community. Explore Oak Ridge and the tourism folks in Oak Ridge love this facility, support this facility wholeheartedly, but there are a number of the people in this community who, when we go out and talk to folks, say, well, I've not been there since you moved. I don't like it since you've moved. And I said, well, have you been there? And many of them say, well, no, I won't go. And our challenge now is almost an emotional hurdle for the citizens of Oak Ridge, because we are attempting to pull all of those people back into this museum. We have an incredible story to tell, and we have a lot of innovations that are in front of us and a lot of phenomenal opportunities. And we are always working and looking for partnerships within the community, especially with the Children's Museum and the History Museum in the old Wildcat Den building. And both of those locations are exceptional. They are really fantastic. And we spend a lot of our time telling the community at large they need to visit those places. If you want to have a really great understanding of our community and the history in this region, you really need to visit those places. I believe, that the tide will raise all of us up to a new and better place. And we do not want to be perceived or thought of as an individual museum in a community. We are part of a collective. Our story is different, our operational structure is different, but we want to tell the story and support those in the community that tell that same story. This, you'll see a couple of pictures of the interior of the museum. On top, you'll see this large structure. I would usually at this point in person ask for a show of hands of folks who have been to the museum, but this will be a little challenging online. I see David there. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. In the bottom left corner, you'll see an exhibit talking about the James Webb Space Telescope. In the center, you'll see a sculpture called Eureka, which we have inherited from Children's Hospital in Knoxville. And in the bottom right corner, you'll see a bus sitting in front of the museum. And I will tell you that at Tulane, the museum could host 2 to 3 full school field trips of three different grades in the museum. And those kids would hardly bump into each other because of the size and scale of that museum. We still have the reputation for hosting multiple field trips in a day, and our education team has done a phenomenal job learning how and knowing how to coordinate those groups of kids through the museum. At any given moment when we have a full house, you'll have a group of kids in the classroom doing hands-on interactives, and then a group of kids doing films in the auditorium, and a group of kids doing scavenger hunts. And then we'll cycle those kids through. It's a well-oiled machine, and we're really excited to be able to facilitate all of these kids at the same time. K-25 History Center opened in 2020 and then was quickly closed due to the pandemic, but has been reopened for some time now and is an exceptional space. We're very proud of this. They have broken ground on an observation tower, basically in front of the parking area when you pull in to visit this museum. And that will be something that AMSI will manage along with this facility and the Oak Ridge facility. We're really excited about that.
Matt, let me interrupt you a second to say that we hope that viewing platform will be finished by January of 2025.
Great, excellent, thank you. I always appreciate a current update. Sometimes Ray, many times Ray has his finger firmly planted on the pulse of the community, whereas the rest of us just get trickle down information. So thank you, Ray, for that.
You bet.
That's wonderful. We are working on our 2023 annual report at the moment, and I apologize for not having current numbers as to this year, but I will say that these numbers have improved. Our total visitation last year was over 50,000 people, with over 36,000 people at AMSI and 13,000 going to K-25. These numbers are good. They have increased for 2023, and we're really excited about that. You'll note on the bottom of this that DOE has a mandate to fund AMSI, but there is a cooperative agreement that operates through AMSI and some of its funding, and that cooperative agreement states that positions the museum in a unique place. If any of you remember the old museum, and somewhere, I think it was in the 90s, they actually started charging for admission. Prior to that, the museum entrance had always been free as part of the federal funding program. I equate what's going on now as we are the 75-year-old grandparent in the community who's finally being asked, you got to think about making a living someday, kid. And we are firmly focused on generating original revenue and visitation for the museum so that we are not continually reliant on federal funding. We want to be a museum that is managing its own funds and taking care of itself. And we are striving to put the museum in a place where the community recognizes that we are capable of sustaining our own weight. And that is an exciting time. But as a 75-year-old business, we really, since we've moved into this new building, consider ourselves a brand new business with an incredible history. And we are focused on the opportunity to create financial opportunities for the museum, working through grants and solicitation and support throughout our community and corporate partners. The goal's primary source of funding right now is people crossing the threshold into the museum. When you pay your admission to the museum, when you buy a membership, you are supporting the museum. However, we are attempting to also elevate and evolve our own opportunities to self-fund the museum. And we have to do that by reaching beyond the threshold, by reaching beyond people just coming into the museum. On the screen, you'll see some of the areas where we have branched out into spreading the word of the American Museum of Science and Energy Foundation. We have an incredible podcast called AMSI-Cast, which is, as Ray had stated, we are going to rebrand that the American Museum of Science and Energy Podcast. We have several segments of that come out every month. Those are usually between 30 to 60-minute interviews with people who are, if we can pat ourselves on the back, world famous within their scientific fields. Folks who are New York Times bestsellers, internationally recognized historians, scientists. We've had half of the national lab directors on as guests, and a lot of really, really smart people. A derivative of that product is the AMSI Science Report, which airs on WUOT in Knoxville on Saturdays. And that's a 4-minute segment where we've culled information out of the AMSI-Cast podcast into bite-sized pieces that are more easily consumable. But at the bottom of this page, you'll also see these symbols, and AMSI has a presence on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, audio files. So this is Spotify. I apologize, that's suddenly escaped me. Twitter, formerly X, and YouTube. We believe that the museum must be nonlinear. A lot of museums in the past several years have really attempted to elevate where they place their content, and we want to be recognized as a museum that is also evolving. It is important for us to promote the museum throughout the region, throughout the state, and across the nation. Once upon a time, the American Museum of Science and Energy was known across the nation as the place to go to learn about nuclear energy and all of these incredible sciences. We are reclaiming this title. We have a lot of initiatives in front of us where the museum is putting science first, and we want to elevate that product. So we're excited about the media platforms that we have access to. But as I stated, our primary function is people coming into the museum. We have 5 permanent gallery areas, which some of those spaces are being renovated and added to, but we've also instituted the Innovators Gallery. And we have begun partnering with corporate sponsors and corporate partners and tech firms to talk about what is the latest and greatest science technology in the world. I spent a week at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas a couple of months ago, and have brought back a collection of people that want partnerships with the museum. One of the most impressive ones was Panasonic. I got an incredible tour of everything they do, from their new handheld razors to their model of a smart city utilizing hydrogen power, to power industry capitalizing on windows that collect solar energy, and a lot of really, really impressive stuff. They are very interested in coming into the museum and showing off what they're doing on a large scale. In the top left-hand corner, this was a partnership with AT&T talking about the electromagnetic spectrum, science of the signal. In the bottom left, RDI technology, which is a very innovative technology. Let's Play was an exhibit, an original exhibit about electronic gaming that began in the early 1900s with pinball games and small electronic action games, all the way up until mobile devices and the latest and greatest technology that you have in the palm of your hand. We have an exhibit about the James Webb Space Telescope. And then right now we're also hosting an exhibit called Reaction Time with Kairos Power. Many of you may be familiar that on the old K25 site, Kairos Power is about to build a new generation test reactor that's going to be built in phases. One of my colleagues spoke in ORICL Class last week discussing that, and we had a representative from Kairos Power from California speaking on that as well. Part of the museum's initiative is when there is something new coming into the community, we want to be a place where people can turn to the museum and learn something new about what's happening. And that is part of the partnership with Kairos Power. On the right-hand side, you'll see a poster that we have for an exhibit called Checkmate. And this is a new exhibit that's going to open at the K25 History Center for members on February 29th, but for the large community at large on March 1st. And this exhibit is going to feature games of the Cold War. Our collections and curator, Quinn Argyle, the director of those departments, has put this together. And we're going to open the exhibit with a family game night. That exhibit will be open to the public. It will be for free, and that will happen between 5 and 7 o'clock for members on the 29th, and for the general public the 1st. Also in the early evening, going into that evening for the game night. The museum has a unique opportunity, like I had stated, where we want to be a place where innovation is featured. If we simply rely on those 5 static permanent exhibits, we have no opportunity to grow. When individuals ask me about how long does it take to go through the museum, I said, if you're chasing a kid, you can be in and out in an hour and feel like you've seen a lot. However, if you are somebody who is interested in science, I've hosted some guests recently, and their comment was, we need 2 more days to walk through this museum. If you really want to understand some incredible science, the museum will occupy your time for a quantity of hours. One of my new questions I ask guests is, your job now is to find the pieces of dead president that we have in the museum. And that sets people back on their heels quite a bit. But if you're interested in forensics, I'll leave that to all of you to come to the museum and find out for yourselves where that president sits. We also believe, as I had stated, because our primary source of funding is coming into the museum, that we have to continue to create new experiences. And on this screen, you'll see a collection of experiences that we've put together. We have relaunched our homeschool classes, and every month we feature a new homeschool class. You can go online. We have online registration for those events. They're really exceptional. We are partnering with Rhone State to develop a second tier of homeschool classes, and we're going to be recording those classes and offering those to folks in the very near future. We are also expanding our palette of opportunities and events. We have had this voyage through the solar system, which is a class. We've had a series called The Sip of Science, which is another set of classes, one of them featuring archaeology and an unidentified found object day. You'll see in the center of the page that UFO looking thing. And that's where we are inviting members of the public to come into the museum. If you bring an item, you get in for free. And we have partnered with the University of Tennessee, some folks in their anthropology department and their historic collections department. So if you have that weird thing that somebody collected and is sitting in your basement and don't know what it is, strange rock, a bone, a contraption of some type, we're inviting people to the museum, and we have our professionals try and figure out what on earth that thing is too. We had a lady who was probably in her late 30s come in one day, and she had a Civil Air Patrol gas mask set that was found in an uncle's closet. And when she walked in, we all went, "Oh, we know exactly what this is." But she didn't know. And it was from her uncle was in Oak Ridge, and that was something that they had, and they just simply didn't know what that thing was. This has been a very popular event. We've had really good crowds for this. We attempt to promote this through all of these events through our social media pages. There's an email that will be going out today. You'll see center left of the screen, the record-setting human snowflake. This was an exciting event that we had at the museum. Nobody has ever made a giant human snowflake before that we could find online. And so we attempted to set the world record. We're going to send that information to the folks at Guinness. And at the moment, because we've not found anyone to counter this, Oak Ridge and the American Museum of Science and Energy has set the world record for the world's largest human snowflake. And we're going to hold that title until somebody proves us wrong, which could be tomorrow in this day and age, but we're not going to argue that too much. Also, you'll see Sally's Night in the corner. We are partnering with organizations. We have a lot of great partnerships with NASA and the larger scientific community. The folks at Hanford and Los Alamos are good friends and partners for what we do. And Sally's Night was an opportunity where we partnered with NASA to talk about the astronaut Sally Ride and her endeavors. You'll also see towards the center of the screen the little tile for the Oppenheimer movie premiere. Perhaps many of you went to the premiere when this movie opened in Oak Ridge. We had 3 theaters. We helped to host that opportunity. But what we also did was we took advantage of the wave of pop culture. And I produced a 30-second trailer that was placed in front of 5 theaters in the region. Their expectation was that that would reach about 160,000 sets of eyes. And I think our actual number, was over 230,000 sets of eyes that all had a glimpse and a welcome to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the American Museum of Science and Energy. This museum could not be what it is without the support of the community. And at every moment, we want to elevate the community that hosts us. It's valuable for us in the museum to recognize that this is an incredible city, and we can't exist the way we exist without its support. We still are attempting to do all of these events to encourage the people of this community. We are a place where we are the same place that they grew up with. We're in a different building, we're in a different structure, but the story that we tell is just as viable today as it has ever been. The bottom right corner, you'll see two graphics for our gala. We had our first gala last year. It was very successful, and we have the save the date for this year's gala coming up just a couple of months away. And that's going to be a very exciting event. We've really changed the format. The DoubleTree Garden Plaza is a great hotel, but this year, because we've given ourselves permission to be innovative, we are going to actually host the gala at the museum. And we have some really exciting things planned for this year's gala, and we're going to alter the ticketing structure, inviting people into the museum for something very, very unique and something that you've never seen before through the American Museum of Science and Energy. Obviously, we still have our bus tour. Our bus holds 32 passengers Monday, Thursday, and Friday at the moment, with one ADA passenger. Tour is about 3.5 hours. In our first year back, we had 1,082 participants. We are currently in let's see, Ray can always correct me on the most politically correct way to say this. We are in a holding pattern, waiting for our friends at the Department of Energy to give us clearance on when we will launch the bus tour this season. But we are excited. We are expecting great numbers this year. Our phone has been ringing. Literally, we have about 10 calls a day and field a handful of emails every day about when is the tour opening. Soon, and very soon is all I can tell you, but we are waiting for our friends from DOE to give us the all clear on that. One of the initiatives that I have believed in for some time in working at the museum is that, as I had stated, since we have moved, there are parts of the community that want that old, beautiful building on Tulane back. I agree. I miss that building. I love that building. However, the museum that we have now affords us a lot of very unique opportunities. And we are going to capitalize on those opportunities with all of our strength and all of our might. And one of the things that I have pushed for the museum to do, which has been supported by our museum director and the other staff and the foundation, is to partner with Oak Ridge Schools. I think that the museum is in a place where we have to prove our merit. Simply existing as a 75-year-old institution is not enough. We have to be viable in our community. I am excited to announce that this initiative, Leading in a World of Emerging Technology, is about to launch, and we have some incredible partners at Oak Ridge Schools, and we are going to elevate what they are doing in our community, because the museum wants to be engaged with the students in this community. And if there's anything that we believe will prove our value to the citizens of this community, it's uplifting our school system. This past
Can I interrupt?
I'm sorry?
Please.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes.
Yes.
You said you were trying to partner with Oak Ridge Schools. How about Anderson County Schools?
Yes, absolutely. So, David, our initiative is we've got to start somewhere. And our first most convenient place is in our own backyard. But we do virtual classes with schools throughout the region. We've worked with Anderson County Schools, Knox County Schools, Oliver Springs Schools, Clinton City Schools, doing virtual classes with all of those partners. And those virtual classes consist of, we have 3 classes that we're doing currently. We have one on pollination, we have one on circuitry, and one on states of matter. and our educators put together bundles of physical materials, and they will actually deliver those materials to the schools in person. And then we will set up a Zoom call very similar to this. And we have a class outline that we give to the instructors, and we walk those students through scientific, real science experiments in real time, live with those students. So we do a lot of those efforts with our partnering schools, because those are the most convenient things we can do. Dave, we have school groups from across East Tennessee coming to the museum every week. So Anderson County is part of that. And when Anderson County comes in, the schools that are up there, they do the Van de Graaff generator. There are a number of classes that they participate in with our educators guiding those classes. We will leave no school left as an island. That is our promise.
The reason I mention that is because probably most people don't realize that, because people who live in the city of Oak Ridge are paying school taxes, not just to the city of Oak Ridge school system, but to the Anderson County school system. And we have two representatives on the Anderson County School Board from Oak Ridge, the city. And a lot of people don't realize that. So I guess, encourage that Anderson County be treated not as a stepsister in a sense, but as an equal partner in whatever you do with Oak Ridge City Schools.
Yeah, David, that's a great note, and I appreciate that comment. Thank you. I would like to let you know that you can rest assured that all of the schools in our region have a contact with AMSI. We're just trying to find the easiest path forward to deal with these. And one of those initiatives has brought us to this moment where we have this emerging technology series. Our goal is that once this series works, then we want to be able to connect this program to other schools in the region. We have had those conversations with teachers, and I vividly remember a conversation with some educators in Maryville, and we were talking about bringing classes into Maryville and supporting those schools. And I said, well, with the lab connections we have here, and they just had a blank look on their face. And they said, you need to understand, we don't have that here. We don't have that experience where we are. So we are attempting to bring all of these resources to the region at large, but for the moment, we're simply starting with the easiest place that we can get a foothold in, so that, again, we can prove our merit to the rest of the schools in the region. Because simply being 75 years old doesn't make you somebody that, the cool kids in high school age want to talk to all the time. So we've got to find a way to innovate and to meet the students exactly where they are. But I would certainly encourage, if you know these folks who are on the Anderson County Board, to reach out to us. We have an operating staff in the museum of really about, there are 4 working staff members, an executive assistant, and 3 educators, and an accountant. Those individuals are the ones that push this rock up the hill. And it is a daunting task on a good day. And so we are excited to have the opportunity to talk to as many schools as we get. I just did a STEM night at Dillis Elementary in Oliver Springs last week, and we have several STEM nights scheduled throughout the region over the next several weeks. In fact, our program coordinator, Tony Schnattelbach, has been tasked with helping to organize the educators, because there are so many requests coming into the museum And we have 3 educators, one full-time, one that works 4 days a week, and another one that works 2 days a week. That is at best a shoestring skeleton. And like I said, we push that rock up the hill every day. But David, I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Continuing on this side of emerging technology, this partnership is working with Oak Ridge Schools and their innovative director, Joe Fothery. And it is putting Oak Ridge School students front and center at the American Museum of Science and Energy. And they're going to be presenting on these 3 topics: coding and cybersecurity, drones, digital twins, and artificial intelligence. And these events are open to the public. They are free to the public. You can register on our website for a seat for these events. And these events are pairing students and Oak Ridge Schools and their innovation laboratories with partners in the real world, in the professional environment, so that we can showcase the uniqueness in Oak Ridge Schools and their push to innovate in their adaptive classrooms with what's going on in the real world. Again, it'll be a very interesting opportunity. And David, to your point, as this evolves, we will be pulling in other schools into the area. One of the things that we're working on in the background is trying to find a way to do some teacher workshops that will invite teachers throughout East Tennessee into the museum, so they can have a better understanding of how the museum can help facilitate educational opportunities, how we meet and surpass state standards in a number of our classes, and how we can build partnerships throughout the region. The museum is open 7 days a week. If you've not been there, I would humbly like to encourage all of you to take the moment and visit when you have the opportunity. Understanding this group that I'm speaking to, we also have opportunities for volunteer situations where you can be at the museum, bus guides and assistants. The museum is wide open for engagement. We want to encourage the community to interact with the museum. A lot of times we find museum champions in the strangest of places, and we want to capitalize on that. We are humbled by the volunteers that contribute their time to the museum. They are truly the face of what this museum does, and they are some of our greatest champions. It is impressive to come into work and have an opportunity to speak with our volunteer staff and learn something at every conversation. They are kind and generous and exuberant with their knowledge, and they are some of our most valued resources. The museum would be a step down without our volunteer staff, and we're honored to have those folks by our sides. But again, if you've not been to this museum or the K-25 History Center, I would encourage you to go on the website. There's a tile that has calendar on it, and find an opportunity to come out and visit the museum. Come to one of these event openings, visit the galleries, visit the Innovators Gallery, learn about our partnerships in the community. We need the support of this community. We thrive on that support. It is what gives us a pulse. And groups like ORICL and the other groups that we have the opportunity to speak with are the ones who will make a difference in the museum's future. So that was a very long-winded way to say that. Oh, there is my slide with a couple of the things that we have coming up. I apologize. We will have that 75th anniversary coming up. That'll be a free day. We have memberships. We have great opportunities for the museum, and it's really a fantastic place to spend some time. So I'll open it up for questions and I'll turn off this screen so you can see the voice behind the graphics again.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Just unmute yourself and ask your question.
I've left them all speechless, Ray.
I've found that this group is not as talkative as I would hope they would be. But if they have any questions, they would ask, I'm sure. So thank you for your presentation. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. And you're welcome to stay, or you may have other things you want to do. So
I'll hang out for a few more minutes, and then I'll exit quietly.
all right, or that whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you all
Yes.
for the opportunity to speak.
All right, thank you for being here. So what would you all like to get out of the rest of the time we have together today and the next 2 Monday mornings? If you have special requests, I will try to include any information that you want that I can get and share with you. So again, please do not hesitate to interrupt and just unmute yourself and speak up. If I don't hear from you, I have a couple of things in my mind that I want to share with you, and I will share these on the next 2 Monday mornings. First one is there is a new book that's coming out. It's a book that's being published by the University of Tennessee Press, and it was written by Lee Redinger, who's a retired professor at the University of Tennessee. Also, Bill Bugg, who is another retired professor, and Al Ekopus. Al has worked at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for a number of years, also retired. And I was on the team for helping to write the book. Lee invited me to help with a course at UT a few years ago, and I did. I helped him as a co-instructor for the class. I told stories and he taught the class. When we finished, I told him he has enough material here about the Manhattan Project that would make a good book. And he took me to heart and did begin pulling this team together. And what the book focuses on is the relationship between the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge, starting during the Manhattan Project and continuing up until today. So that book is going to come out, I believe, about June, sometime in the summer. And there'll be a book launch for it that we're planning for somewhere around September, I believe, is what the UT Press is trying to pull together. And for sure, Matt, we will want to hold a book launch at the American Museum of Science and Energy if we can convince those folks in Knoxville that we ought to have 2 of them, one in Knoxville for the UT folks and one in Oak Ridge for the Oak Ridge folks. So that's something that I'll share with you either next week or the following week. We'll get it in. And I said I had 2 things. The second one is a presentation that I pulled together at the request of the Women's Executive Club in Knoxville. And it has to do with women in the nuclear age. And I've enjoyed giving that presentation to the executive club in Knoxville that asked me to do it. And then the American Museum of Science and Energy. I'm sorry, we are looking at ways that might be incorporated in some of the things that we're doing. And this is just my idea. Matt's not even aware of this. but I think there's something that could be put together for the museum. I did present it at the East Tennessee Economic Council, and I also presented it at a webinar that was held in conjunction with the historian from Los Alamos National Laboratory, from Hanford, Washington, from Lawrence Livermore, and from Sandia. So we had a full session that focused on women of the nuclear age. So I'll be sharing that with you again over the next couple of weeks. So have I let you think long enough that you've got some requests of me, some things you would like to see included in this class that I might not have thought of, but would be glad to try and incorporate? So I'll give you a few minutes to give me that response.
Hi. So I was wondering if you would be talking at all about the prophet of Oak Ridge. Are you familiar with that story?
I am quite familiar with that story, and yes, I will do that. We will talk about that, and thank you for asking for the John Hendricks story. I will make.
Yeah, John Hendricks was my husband's great grandfather.
Oh,
So
good.
it's interesting to hear for the story from the family perspective, and I
Yeah,
think it's such an interesting footnote to the history of Oak Ridge.
I'll be more than happy to include that. And one way that I could do that probably easiest would be to include the documentary film that we made at Y12 on John Hendricks, the prophet of Oak Ridge. And
Great, thank you.
I'll do that, and we'll get that in for sure. That,
Awesome.
by the way, that is a story that I use to introduce my talk about Oak Ridge to a number of places across the nation that I get to share it with in many different ways. And I'll include the John Hendricks story as an introduction. I also include the Senator McKellar story about how Oak Ridge was selected. And I see people shaking their head and grinning. They know that story. I at one time had an opportunity to interview Senator Howard Baker. Matt, I believe you went on that trip with us. You did.
So, yes.
We went up to his office in Huntsville and up in Scott County. Matt set the television camera up in his office, had him sitting behind the desk and all sitting there and poised and ready to go. And the question was asked by Jim Campbell, who was there with us. Okay, Senator, tell us about your connection to Oak Ridge. And Matt, if you remember, he said, first, let me tell you how that place was chosen. And he went into that Senator McKellar story in the most flamboyant way you've ever seen. When he got through, I said, thank you, Senator, for putting on video the story that I tell everyone who comes to Oak Ridge. He said, where did you get that story? I said, I got it from Dick Smizer, longtime editor of the local newspaper there, the Oak Ridger. He laughed and said, that's where I got it too. So that story, the punchline in that story is after President Roosevelt got that letter signed by Albert Einstein, delivered to him by Alexander Sachs, who was a personal friend. Leo Szilard had written the letter, but he knew the president would not know who he was. But Albert Einstein was a well-known name then in the 40s, so 39 and 40. So they got a friend of the president to get that letter to him. And Matt, I just learned within the last month from General Groves' grandson, Dick Groves, who you had an association with that took you out to Hanford a few weeks ago. I just learned from him that President Roosevelt never read the letter that Alexander Sachs took to him, signed by Albert Einstein. Alexander Sachs took the content of the letter and wrote an executive summary for it, a one-paragraph executive summary on the top of the letter. And when he went in to meet the president read his executive summary, never read the letter in its content. But from that information, the Manhattan Project was the end result of that interaction between the two of them.
Right.
And when the president saw that and recognized he's going to have to put a lot of money into this war effort, he needed to have a way to do that without raising a lot of attention to it. So he called in Senator McKellar and said, Senator McKellar was the head of the budget committee in the Senate at the time, and also a senator from Tennessee. So he said, Senator, I need to put a large amount of money against the war effort, and I can't let the press or anyone know how much it is or what it's being used for. Can you help me with that? Senator McKellar said, yes, Mr. President, I can do that for you. Just where in Tennessee are you going to put that thing? Now, that likely had more to do with us getting selected than any rivers and valleys and ridges and proximity to Norris Dam.
No.
An interesting, oh, I'm sorry, please speak up.
No, that's okay. I just thought that I'm surprised that the president never read that letter because as I understand it, he and Churchill had been talking about the development of
Yes,
this special thing. So I'm surprised to hear that.
I was too, but I think the content of the letter was conveyed to him and he understood. And you're right. The British knew that the atomic bomb could be made from uranium-235, but they did not know and did not have the resources that they thought would be needed. It's hard to get that uranium-235 separated from natural uranium. So Churchill had been talking with Roosevelt, and eventually they put together the folks who were working on the issue in Great Britain, and Vannevar Bush and those that were working on it here in the United States. And what actually the Great Britain folks said is, we don't have the resources to do the work necessary to get that material for a bomb. So you do the research, do the work, make the bomb, and we'll send our scientists over to help. And that's in fact what actually happened is several scientists from Great Britain came over and worked with especially up at the University of Columbia and with other places where they were working on the Manhattan Project. So you're correct. I wanted to tell you that just recently there was a article in the New York Times, I believe that's where it was, where a lady had done some research and she questioned how much Senator McKellar knew about what was happening and whether or not he actually influenced getting the Manhattan Project located in Oak Ridge. And I take exception to that. I'm glad people are doing research and finding things, but I know from the firsthand personal account of Lester Fox, who just passed away within the past year or two. He was a sophomore in high school at Oliver Springs in 1942, and he was skipping school. He was walking, he'd been playing a pinball machine. He was walking down the street in Oliver Springs and he went by the telephone office, him and a buddy, and the telephone operator leaned her head out and said, Lester, go get the principal. He's got an important phone call. Now, Lester's skipping school, but he does. He goes and gets the principal. Principal comes over and takes the phone call, comes back to the school, calls all the students together in an assembly, and says, I've just gotten a phone call from Senator McKellar. He wants me to tell you to go home and tell your parents you're going to have to find another place to live. The government's going to take your property for the war effort. Now, Lester swears that's the way these 3,000 people first learned they were going to have to get off of 60,000 acres, nearly, in order to make room for the Manhattan Project. Many of them didn't have automobiles. They didn't have trucks to move their belongings. What they did have was young men in the military getting killed. So they wanted to do anything they could to help win that war and stop that killing. Now, that's a personal firsthand account from someone who experienced that call from Senator McKellar. I have no doubt that the conversation about hiding that money took place. I'm also doing a little research now on something that happened when President Truman, when he was a senator, before he became the vice president, President Truman had a responsibility with a committee to investigate any excessive spending of the government funds or any difficulties that he could turn up that would help to understand where all of this money is being spent. And he got wind of something happening in Hanford, Washington, and also there was something happening in Tennessee. So he started inquiring about that, wanting to come and visit what was happening at Hanford, Washington, and wanting to come to Oak Ridge. So he was making the connections to try and get here. And the people who he was talking with reported back up through their chains, through Colonel Nichols and General Groves, and General Groves reported it to Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush called Senator Truman and said, Senator, that's not something that you want to look into. It's something very important for the war effort. Please do not pursue it. Senator Truman stopped the investigation based on that input from Vannevar Bush, and even didn't know about the atomic bomb or the Manhattan Project when he was a vice president. He only learned it a few days or weeks after after President Roosevelt died and he became the president. So I'm doing the research to write a historically speaking column about Senator Truman and how he wanted to come to Oak Ridge, but did not because of the secrecy associated with it. But when I tell that story about Senator McKellar, and I get to the part about the people having to leave to make room for the Manhattan Project, I introduce the John Hendricks story by saying one of those families that had to leave was descended from a man named John Hendricks, and that John was born in 1865 in Bear Creek Valley, Civil War time, right in the middle of where the Y-12 plant is located today. Then in 1900, his youngest daughter died. His wife accused him of being the reason because he corrected her the day before. So she got mad and left him, took the rest of the children, went to Arkansas, and never came back. This really upset John, so he prayed to God, wanting to know why this was happening to him. Heard a loud voice during one of those prayers that said, if you'll go sleep on the ground for 40 nights, you'll learn the future of this place. It must have been in the wintertime because, as the story goes, his hair froze to the ground. Now, let me interrupt my story to tell you, these little communities that were here before the Manhattan Project, New Hope, out where Y-12 is, New Bethel, down where the Oak Ridge National Laboratory is, Wheat, down where the K-25 site is, the History Center is today, and Robertsville, right where Robertsville School is, middle school is today. and Scarborough, where the school is still over there at the South Campus of the Oak Ridge Associated University. Some of these communities still hold annual reunions every year. Wheat holds theirs the first Sunday in October. New Bethel holds theirs on Memorial Day. And a few years ago, I was speaking at one of these reunions, and I was telling the story about John Hendricks. I got to the part about his hair freezing to the ground. This little lady held her hand up out in the audience. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "My grandmother put a quilt on John Hendricks when he was sleeping on the ground and fed him chicken soup because he was about to freeze to death." Now, you keep that in mind while I finish my story. When John got through sleeping on the ground, he had tremendous stories to tell. He'd tell anyone that would listen. He'd tell them there's going to be a huge factory built in Bear Creek Valley that'll help win the greatest war there'll ever be. Going to be a city built on Black Oak Ridge. Going to be a railroad spur run right down by his property line. And the seat of power for all this is going to be between Pyatt's Place and Tadlock's farm. Now, John died in 1915. In 1942, when the Manhattan Project came in here, the first shovelful of dirt they dug was right between Pyatt's Place and Tadlock's farm. That's where they put the administration building. That's where the federal office building is today. That city on Black Oak Ridge is called Oak Ridge. That railroad spur runs right down by his property line in Hendricks Creek subdivision, named for John Hendricks. In fact, he's buried there at 123 Hendricks Drive, right up on top of the rise, and in that subdivision in a vacant lot there. That's one of the cemeteries. That there's over 70 cemeteries in Oak Ridge Reservation area. That most of them were there before the Manhattan Project. And of course, Y12 is in Bear Creek Valley, where the uranium for Little Boy was obtained that did help win World War II. So they thought old John was crazy when he's telling all these stories, so they put him in a hospital for the insane. That hospital, by the way, is just across Clinch River. We put a historical marker up for it just a few months ago. And anyway, he didn't stay there long till he left, walked away, and came back home. Sat down on his front porch and he put 8 rocks out in the yard in front of him. When the deputy sheriff came, says, "John, you're gonna have to go back to that hospital." He said, "No, I'm not going. And besides, these rocks will protect me from you. And besides, God's going to destroy that hospital." Within the next few weeks, it was struck by lightning. And I learned when we were putting that marker up that at least one of the buildings burned to the ground right after John said that. So they began to pay more attention to John. I put this story on my website, draysmith.com. And I've been contacted by a lot of people descended from John. The ones out in Arkansas, they're just glad to have someone in their ancestry with a legend like that attached to his name. Ones here in Tennessee, they know the legend, so they tell me other things he prophesied, like cargo be transported through the air. He said that before there were any airplanes. And his granddaughter told me she was the adopted daughter of Parley Raby, the stepdaughter of John. And she told me that he said they were going to split a tree when they cut that railroad right away. She said for years they kept a little half stump right by that railroad track, painted white. Her name was Grace Raby Crawford, and she wrote the book, the little pamphlet Back of Oak Ridge, which I've included in the book that I've written about John Hendricks. It has all of the historically speaking columns that I've made about that in there as well. So I'll show you the video next time. It'll take me a little bit to get to it today, but we'll look at that as we come into the next session of even more stories from the Secret City. thank you all for being here. And I see Karen, you have a comment. Please.
Yeah, I have a question. I was wondering why they use the letter Q for Q clearance. Why the letter Q?
Yeah, I did some research on that a few years back, and I never could determine where the Q came from. I'll have to look into that research again, and I'll explain to you what I did learn. And we'll do that in another session because I don't have it right in front of me. Okay.
Okay.
I'm wondering if it was arbitrary, Karen, like when they chose X10, I think that was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
arbitrary, Y12.
Yeah, those code names have no meaning except K25, and K might stand for the Kellex company that made the gaseous diffusion equipment, and 25 was a shortcut name for uranium-235. Took the 2 off the right-hand side of 92, the atomic number,
No, I
and
didn't know that.
235. I'm sorry.
No, we didn't know that.
Yeah, and they called it 25 for uranium. They did the same thing for plutonium. They took the 4 off the right-hand side of 94, the atomic number, and the 9 off the right-hand side of 239, and they called plutonium 49. There's a guy, Jeremy Bernstein, who's written a book, Plutonium, the World's Most Dangerous Material. On the front cover of his book, he has a watermark of a 4 and a 9. So he knows the story about plutonium. But X10, Y12, S50, there's no meaning to that. In fact, if you go to the K25 History Center, and if they haven't taken it down, if the photographic display is still in the room there, there's one photograph of a letter from General Groves responding to a question that George Robinson asked him. Robinson was writing the book, the Oak Ridge Story, and he published it in 1950. And he wrote the general asking him, where did these code names come from? General Groves responded and said, for the life of me, I can't remember where they came from. I don't think they have any meaning other than the K25. And he said the same thing I just told you about K25. So I'll see what I can dig up on that Q for you, Karen. All right.
What was Matt's last name?
I'm sorry.
What was Matt's last name?
Mullins. Matt Mullins.
Owens?
Mullins, Mullins.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. Glad to do it. Look him up and when you go to the museum. Thank you again, Matt, for being here with us
Hello to me
today.
sometime.
I'm sorry?
I said they can come by and say hello to me anytime
Yes.
they want.
Absolutely. Please do that. Thank you all for spending the time with me, and I'll see you again next Monday morning.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.